Today we are driving a 1974 Porsche 2.7 Carrera Targa, an example of a very, very exciting 911. This particular example has just come through a restoration from my friend David Belford. It's a fabulous example. It's been done properly. All the boxes are ticked. It is as it left the factory, which is very, very reassuring because it's a car that has a specification cosmetically, which is a little bit against the grain.
That's an impressive looking car.
Indeed.
These cars, there were only something like 1,500 units made in total worldwide. I think there was something like 7 of these Targas delivered to Australia in total. So in 1974, there was a fair bit going on in the world. We had the fuel crisis, there was a stock market crash. I think the dealer price in Australia was around $20,900. The median house price at the time in Melbourne was $22,000. So a very, very expensive car in the scheme of things, and this particular car with all of the options on it brought it up to around $22,000. So a very, very special example.
And the engine happens to be shared with the absolute halo car of all classic 911s, which is the 73 Carrera RS.
There is virtually no discernible difference with the mechanicals in this car, and that's what makes it super special. We were trying to work out, is this car better than owning a Carrera RS?
What are the details that make it an Aussie delivery car?
The ductiles were an option for the Australian market.
Because as we know...
Yeah, the Germans couldn't actually have the ductiles.
Yeah.
Because of their road transport authority. The little mirror here.
Golf club mirror?
The golf club mirror, that was due to the Australian design rules. The fact that the steering wheel's on the right-hand side.
And we know that the safety decals were optioned on it from the factory because there's no badge, there's no crest, and they're...
It's a little known fact that people go, oh, but you didn't put the badge back on. But they never had them with this option.
And period tyres.
This car looks like something that could have been in a brochure in 1974 for Porsche because the tyres look correct.
But this flat six, this is the end of the olden days. This is before they had to worry too much about fuel consumption, before they had to worry about emissions. As we know, the US market didn't get this engine because it was too dirty for the US market. Mechanical injected engines like this howl and they make their hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I love the way that you plated all the important parts and that you're using a genuine Porsche oil filter. Very nice engine bay.
That the US cars had to go through this test, which the cars would get subjected to a 5-mile-an-hour impact.
Yeah.
And the bumpers had to return back to their original position. So the US cars actually got a little shock absorber as a bumper iron mount. This car does not have those.
Do you want to test it?
Do you want to roll it in? Better not. I've just finished it. I don't feel like fixing it again.
Some would say you could drive this car to work if your work happened to be a hairdresser.
So, mate, Targas aren't hairdressers' cars.
You don't reckon?
No.
Do you know why I like mechanical injection engines?
Why, Benny?
Because the pump is like a little house for 6 wee German men in overalls, but they're carrying big cans of petrol. And they have a supervisor that shouts at them when it's their turn to pour neat petrol down a pipe. And then after that, the German men, they became redundant because they were replaced with robots.
Yeah.
That's what it's like.
Yeah. Logic would have it that this being the successor to the 911 Carrera RS would be better.
If there is one thing that Porsche do,
they develop their cars,
the next car
is always better.
Without fail.
Handles better, but it is pretty much exactly the same suspension.
It's got more grip, doesn't it?
Well, no, because it's got exactly the same wheels and exactly the same tyres. The gearbox is great, you know, like the gears are matched so beautifully to the engine and the rev power band.
Are the box ratios the same as they are in a 73?
Same as a 73 RS.
Same. So the only reason that a 73 RS is worth more money is because there's fewer of them.
No, they've made about the same number of cars.
Well, there you go, they're the same. So the only nuffs that go and pay all that money for a 2.7 RS are the ones that like being uncomfortable and picturing themselves on the front cover of a book.
Well, as you know, like race car bred cars always have this mystique and you know. And
this is a race car bred car. It just looks different.
But they didn't call it the RS anymore.
No, it's just 2 letters though.
It's a little bit more comfortable. It's got better seats. It's, you know, the steering wheel feels better. I mean, there's just a little bit more of a driver's car for the road.
Yes.
You can throw them around. They're not super stiff that you're going to get jittered across all of the bounces, the bumps and bounces in the road.
Are they as stiff as a 73 Carrera?
They're the same suspension.
It's the same car.
It's mechanically identical.
It's so upsetting.
The difference, the difference is the rear trailing arms on the rear suspension are made of alloy, whereas the RS was made of steel. Right. But really, the only mechanical difference is that. Just an absolute pleasure to drive. And what's special is that the client that owns this car is getting to drive it the way it drove back when it was new. When you restore a car, you get to change all of these things, you know, like wheel bearings and steering couplings and tie rod ends, and everything gets back to the factory specifications. It did exactly what it did when it was brand new, and that is a special experience. You want to talk about the best air-cooled 911, and the best might not do everything perfectly.
Correct.
But I think there's not a sum of things that any other air-cooled 911 does better than this car.
Well, I think you might be right, you know. As someone who was absolute 993 diehard might disagree with you and say, well, maybe an RSCS is a more exciting car to drive, but you can't really drive it to the shops like this, you know?
Yeah,
and then maybe you could say, well, perhaps the 993 Turbo is a better car because you can drive that to the shops and you can actually punt it around a circuit. But it's clinical compared to this.
Yeah.
If you go back from this car, you get the whole back catalogue of 901 series cars from 2 litre to 2.4, and they're all great.
They're all fantastic, and they've got all elements of this car, but this car just has the extra torque and the extra power.
I think Porsche have done an incredibly good job of confusing everyone with what the Carrera nameplate has stood for.
Sure.
But this car was only really the 2nd year and 3rd year of Carrera appearing on 911s. It was less than a decade after this car that Carrera was basically plastered on the back of every 911, and still is today. It was a time when the Carrera nameplate really meant a special bit of kit.
Right.
It's an absolute, you know, gospel for the public relating a car to a racing car.
Yeah.
So at the time that these things were brand new, it was 934, 935.
Yeah.
The cars were much more exaggerated. You couldn't really, you knew they were 911s, but you couldn't really walk into a dealership and buy a 935.
That's right. Interestingly, when this car was built, the motorsport department carefully read the rules and realised that they only needed to build 50 special models as a development of the road car to get into Group 3 and Group 4 racing.
Yeah, 50, that's it.
That's it.
Which is nothing, I mean, compared to the 450 units you'd have to build for later on.
They made about 50 of the 1974 3 litre RS.
Yep.
And then from that they made the Group 4 cars, which were the RSRs.
Yep.
Which were again based on the same car but had wider flares, bigger tyres. And that's why a lot of these cars were hot rodded, backdated, changed.
When they got cheap.
Updated. The guards, like this model in particular, a lot of the Targas, the engine was pilfered for hot rods, for RS replicas, because it's exactly the same engine as a 73 RS. So the 911 83 designation engine, which is what this is, was seen as hot property. And if it's in a Targa, Targas weren't that valuable. at the time. So a lot of these cars lost their engines. So probably makes these Targas even more rare than what they were to start with.
Transported back in time, that's how I felt when I got back behind the wheel of this car this morning. It is an exciting experience. Doesn't matter what the car's worth, doesn't matter what the car's history is. When you're actually behind the wheel, using the clutch and the weight of the accelerator and listening to the engine wail and selecting gear after gear and pointing in the right direction and braking and feeling the car tip into corners properly and react underneath you, then you know it's a good car, and it's a really, really good car. If you just talk about 911 values and what you get for your money with that kind of car, you can't really get a more exciting car.
Is this the best air-cooled 911 that you can own?
Well, the only difference really is that people will not know that you've got the halo car, you've just got something different.
Well,
that doesn't matter.
That doesn't matter, you know, like this is better value for money.
If you had to go out and buy a 2.7 RS today, you'd be talking about millions of dollars, which makes one of these things, at least in Australia, look pretty cheap at about 400.
Great value.
Say, start to talk nonsensical terms by putting value in the same sentence as a car that's the best part of $500,000.
It does the same thing, it's got the same mechanicals.
It has better seats.
It's better seats, it's more comfortable, they came in great colours. Is it a better car?
No, I think it might be.
Don't tell any 911 Carrera RS owners that the 2.7 Carrera is a better car than theirs, because they pay a lot more.
Yeah.